So hi, we're from Alpha Omega London, maker of shoes at heart but creator of waves in the fashion industry. We started this podcast series to tackle head-on the current issues that matter in the society we live in today and get honest views from the mouths that matter. So in this series, we're discussing how fashion over the years has frolicked with its association with revolutionary causes and social injustices, revolutionising both the industry and the way we view gender in a post-industrialised world. So, tackling this discussion, this series, is Tamara,
Nazina,
Priyanka, Kate.
So, welcome back to episode 3 of this podcast series. If you haven't listened to the first two, go back and listen to them because everything will make a lot more sense. So, what we've actually found now is that we definitely have all been brainwashed through stereotypes in our views of gender roles because despite the fact that we're kind of waving the white flag for fluidity, we've definitely all subconsciously gone back to pink is for girls and blue is for boys. So brings us to the question, where are we now? And are we in a gender revolution? Do we need a gender revolution? And do we actually need gender roles in the society that we're currently in?
I think we do. They shouldn't be too restrictive. I think that the extremes are what harms us. And don't forget, I think it's also when, I mean, if we were to look at the sort of inequalities that have arisen from, I guess, the restrictive roles, they've largely come from, I mean, we're sort of going back into the Industrial Revolution, but they largely come from the shift that I guess women played, which came from the homes into the workplace. And I think, you know, when women were in a way threatening patriarchy to some degree, that's where the issues arose, that's where the inequalities arose. And I feel that throughout those times, you know, women fighting for, you know, human rights and various other, you know, social issues, you know, we've come to a point where we're actually, I mean, we're in a good place, but we're not necessarily, you know, we're not in a place where we have eradicated a lot of, you know, a lot of the problems that women still even today encounter.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't feel as though the roles are necessarily the arch enemy in all of this. And, you know, to some degree, there is a sense of flux that kind of exists between both male and female, meaning, you know, as we progress into our, you know, sort of further into our adulthood, you know, we tend to sort of rely a little bit more on our gender roles, and the sort of fight towards, you know, those the fight against those gender roles in our previous years or in our earlier years have kind of put us in this state of confusion. We're sort of thinking, well, men don't know how to, you know, see themselves anymore. Women don't know what they want, whether they still want their career, or whether they want to be at home and raise their children as they get older. And it's almost, there's a lot of questioning that comes. But I think rather than looking at gender roles as being this arch enemy, we kind of need to look elsewhere and think, well, you know, let's just continue to create an environment where we can all exist without there being such negativity about how the other is judged. Basically, we can use that format and address it to, you know, a community of those who feel that they don't, you know, correspond to, or they don't associate themselves as either male or female, so that the agender or the gender fluid or the gender queer community or the transgender community. So yeah, that's personally how I feel.
But I think that's kind of the key issue that we are facing right now. So like you said, historically, there have been very defined gender roles, and it almost made things easier. If people didn't like it, they didn't like it, but that was how things were done. The man went to work, the woman stayed at home. Well, I mean, that's how it was in the UK, and I do think other cultures still have that, and I know it's different in different places, and sometimes women had to give up a job, but that was the kind of general theme of things, is that's what a man did and that's what a woman did. And I think we're now more than ever in a societal point that that's not the case anymore, and you can do either. A guy could stay home and look after the kids, and the woman can work. A woman can earn more than a man, and that's okay in a relationship. And I think we are in that time where there's far less definition. But does that confuse things? Does that make us almost lost? Do we need that guideline?
I think there's an element of, as you just correctly sort of mentioned, that we do need a very sort of a loose understanding as to, because don't forget, these roles, they don't just come from nowhere. They're pretty much based on, I mean, yes, they're based on history, religion, etc. But you can't deny that a male form is different to a female's form. And so there needs to be some understanding as to how a male and a female work together, towards one goal. I don't know if that makes any sense, but we consider, the unity of a man and a woman, and how that unity actually works, for a better, outcome. And I think at the moment there's way too much focus. I think we tend to handpick a lot of the social issues that affect women, particularly if it's within the sort of, gender inequality spectrum. But we're completely ignoring, some of the quite, sort of serious issues. For example, we talk about gender pay and the gap between male and female, and this sort of like fighting against misogyny and patriarchy, but yet still we completely ignore the porn industry. We completely ignore the sort of the fueling of misogyny amongst those industries. And I just feel as though we're just nitpicking. I think we just need to not focus too much on these roles and just try to make it work.
I think it's difficult though, because it's become more aware, because the industries have become more transparent, and more transparency has been pushed onto industries, and therefore people are more aware that there is this disparage between, for example, with pay, male and female's pay. And we might not have been aware of it before because people didn't know how much each other got paid. You might think that a guy might have maybe got paid more, but you didn't really know. And I think, for example, with the BBC publishing pay, and then everything about in the film industry as well, with women finding out that, their male counterpart has been paid, I don't know, something disgusting like double what they've been paid. And I think it's this idea that, we were all kind of bobbing along happily because we were like, equal opportunity. Women are still, we've finally been able to have the same opportunities as men. And then suddenly there's that other kind of turn, it's like smoke and mirrors, isn't it? It's like, oh, actually, we've been given equal opportunity, but it's not as good an opportunity as what the man's been given.
Right.
You've been given it, it's open to you now, but it's not really the same package.
Right.
So the idea there is more transparency and there's more awareness over the
Which
kind
is
of the
good.
difference.
Yeah.
Do we think that we then need to work from this platform to... Do we think, male and female genders, are they equal yet? Do we need to work more to make them equal?
I mean, I think people in their 20s and 30s now are the first generation which is kind of facing this situation where a woman to be at home is an aberration, like it's not an option anymore. Like the cost of living and the lifestyle requires young families to have both the wife and the husband to work and earn and like have two incomes basically. And also I think there's like this constant pressure of being good at work and being good parents as well these days. So I think there's already a lot today's people are trying to handle at the same time. So but yeah, about equality, I don't know how much is that, like I don't know where that is going. I agree that, of course, women haven't gotten, like, everything's not very ideal for women at the moment. But I also agree that things have changed a lot, and there is a lot of change to swallow at the moment. Like, there were a lot of things that women wouldn't do in the past, but they are doing it now. So I see progress there. But of course, we're not where we would think, or where we would want to be, of course.
So, like with kind of, the whole idea with agender fashion, do we just need to get rid of gender roles to create and to have that push towards equality? I mean, Kate, what do you think about that?
I don't think you can really get rid of the gender roles. I think part of the reason that we haven't seen, we have, like Priyanka says, we've seen an awful lot of progress, but maybe not as much, is because all the new things that are happening, women working, but like we said, we've all been a bit brainwashed. The ideas in people's heads haven't caught up with everything else yet. And I think until that happens, like, society generally has caught up with all the changes, the physical changes that are going on, women actually going into work, men staying at home. If the whole society hasn't caught up with that yet, then that's going to take a bit of time. And that's why you don't see it always working in a way. And I think that because there's still a little bit of, for women as well, there's a bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you want to go for a sort of more prescribed gender role, then you're sort of, in today's climate, you're unambitious, or you're this, or you're that, or you don't want to work, or but if you do, you're some sort of like power crazed career woman who has got no nurturing side. And then women probably feel at the moment that they can't win, and men don't really know where they are.
Just a quick reminder, you're listening to the AO London podcast. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen on, give us a review, and carry on the protest. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Equality is really, it's kind of born out of this, the issue that has been raised with the LGBT community, and sort of, wanting, I guess, equality themselves, or wanting acknowledgement, or wanting not to be treated, with prejudice, etc. So I think, we're thrown up, these issues based on sometimes the progression of gender identities throughout time. And, again, there is no real solution, to this equality issue, but getting rid of roles, I don't think will help us, progress any closer towards that solution. I think actually what we need to try and do is maybe get rid of that fear, get rid of the prejudice, get rid of the wanting to fit in, get rid of the fulfilling expectations, not really understanding who you are. I think once we tackle those issues and create a society where we're all pretty much accepting of who we are individually, then I think...
I mean, Priyanka,
sorry.
you look
Yeah.
brimming to speak. You're like buzzing on your seat there. You're like, come on,
There's
please,
so
can
much
I
to say.
say something?
I could go on and on, actually. I mean, when you think of, I don't know how many, I don't know if transgenders, for example, are being accepted enough. Although when I look at India, it recently, I think in 2009 or something, they put other genders, the Election Commission put other genders as a category on the official ballots. But even today, they're not really seen as one of us. They're definitely outcasted. It's it really surprises me a lot. And this question of, this third gender, the discussion of it has been there for more than 4,000 years now. Like Hindu texts like Mahabharata and Ramayana, they mention people with gender ambiguities they associate them with demigods. And even the Kama Sutra has talked about, it talks about a wide spectrum of genders partaking in sexual acts. And this has been there since 300 BC, if I'm not wrong. I hope I'm not wrong. And things like that, and a very significant Hindu deity, the Lord Shiva, is known to known to transform genders when he merges with his wife Parvati into Ardhanarishwara. Yes, it's that. So these things have been there for quite long, but are we still acceptive of their identities. I don't think we are. We still treat them separately as a different community. When you look at transgender models, I think when you look at their interviews, of course you see them on the runways and they're all there, all glamorous and out there. But are we really tackling with deeper issues, basic facilities like public toilets, or they're still fighting for food and shelter?
What's quite interesting, and thank you for mentioning what you've just mentioned, but what I realised was that there are actually roles within the transgender community, within LGBT community. They still assign very loosely and very fluid, but gender roles, even though they're seen as, I guess, there's a word that I'm trying to think of, but even though they try to deviate from this sort of gender role approach, there is still an element, at least, of there being a gender role type structure within the community.
We keep on going back to the idea of the word role, the word structure, the word kind of falling into an identity. I mean, are these holding us back? Are we too hung up on the idea that you need the obsession to pigeonhole people and the obsession to figure someone out? I think, are we too hung up on the idea that you need to, you, like you said, even with the ballot paper, you need to tick a box. There needs to be a box to fill. And are we too hung up on that concept that we can't move on from it? We almost need to figure everyone out, and it's almost got to the point that, do we need to figure out, okay, what are all of the gender options, just so we can put you in one of them, so we can figure you out?
Well, it's all about power. It's all about identifying with whoever's, whichever group is in power. And obviously, if you identify yourself as basically being positioned somewhere where you don't have access to that power, well then, you're living a life where you're constantly having to fight and redefine and empower yourself. So I feel as though people are putting themselves, or people are actually putting other people in boxes, purely for that sense of survival, purely for that sense of competition, purely for trying to get ahead, as we mentioned in previous podcast series, just so that they're able maybe to have access to that power. Possibly.
But then why do we need those boxes? Because clearly that basically says that our gender plays a massive part of who we are. If we need to figure someone out so much, it's the first question you get on any questionnaire, what gender are you? It's the first thing that people figure out about you. Are you a girl, or are you a boy, or do you not identify with either? And it's the idea that why is that still always the first question? Because it resonates massively on who we are. And are we ever able to kind of get through this state of flux with these still there? I know in so many things they're trying to be not genderless, but as in they're not asking, what gender you are. Should it even be a question anymore? To move on from this, should it still be important?
To answer your question, and sorry to have to use the context of the corporate environment, but say, for example, a business that's, I don't know, early stage is looking to obviously build, and they're hiring for a particular position, which is quite pivotal within that growth. And that position is potentially, or the candidate is a female, and she's of that age. I don't know what age that is, of looking to possibly have children. Maybe she's married already. Sometimes it's a very prejudicial approach to this sort of way of thinking, but to that person hiring, it will be seen or counted as a little bit of a negative, because then that company is going to have to think about, okay, so if she's on child number 1, then child number 2 might come within a year or so, but given that she's a female, she would have to take maternity leave. And they just sort of see that they attach the gender role of, a mother needing, X amount of additional, I don't know, time to bring up and raise and nurture her family, and it's viewed as negative, but they need to do that because, or they have that opinion because what they're doing is they're looking out for, their own survival.
But what I find most interesting is the complete counter, like the polar opposite of that on the other side, is that in the workplace, and I remember listening the other day about this, is that to have children for men, it gives them a massive advantage in the workplace because they're seen as more accountable. They're seen as, more of a leader. They can make better decisions. And to be honest, if you're a guy with kids, you're more likely to get that promotion because that's how you're perceived. And I think that, to change that perception, it's essentially you're going to have to change the roles of parents and what parents do. But the thing, we can't change that females are the one that get pregnant. I mean, essentially that's it. There will be a time, even if you work up to the day of labour, you will still have to take time off to have the baby. Like, there will always be that part of your life that the man, he made the child, but he's not the bearer of the child, and he doesn't have to take a single day off in his life.
Do you know, it's interesting though, but I do often try to sort of look at, the whole workplace and the patriarchy or the patriarchal system.
I think that's
that exists, right? But again, it kind of boils down to, as you just mentioned, a bit of biology, and we can't deny the fact that we have bodies that actually birth human beings, and we can't, in our minds, think it's conceivable for us to do that tomorrow and then go to work on Monday. It's just not. We are assigned certain roles to be able to procreate and nurture.
And I think it also goes, you're right, it goes back to the biological makeup. Like, men, and as much as it pains me, men are stronger than women, and you could be a lot, you could be like, you could be very fit for a woman, but if in a fight in an alleyway, a man would most likely overpower you, and it's just biologically. Are we ever able to get away from those kind of societal roles? Because essentially it's part of our makeup. I mean, Kate, you've been very quiet on silently observing, thinking,
I mean, I think it's not necessarily the roles themselves that are the issue. It's how they're applied and who they get applied to. There's no reason. I know, we're talking about gender roles, men's roles and women's roles, but I think it's how we deal with the attitude of men taking what were traditionally women's roles, women changing men's roles, and how it suits that individual. Some women don't want to sort of go down what is traditionally a female gender role. Some men don't want to go down the male role. You have two men in a relationship, one of them may adopt a female role or may not. And I think it's just very much, it's totally down to the individual. And I think it's just addressing like people's attitudes to that and getting away from that just being a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, there are examples I know of men staying at home and looking after the children.
Yeah.
Whilst the woman goes out to work.
And if that works for them, that's awesome. But it's just kind of shaken off the very old attitudes to do it, that you can't do anything differently. You can still have the gender roles if people, that's how people work and like them, but they don't actually have to be applied to their original gender if you don't want them to.
So, I think summing up this episode now, I think we've found that we can't get rid of gender roles. Yeah. They are quite literally there. We have genders, and there will always be a role to fill. But I think what we can change and should want to change are the associations with these roles and the positive and negatives that we pair with them. And I think that's how we tackle this state of flux that we're in, and that's how we tackle this, I suppose, identity crisis, or that kind of defines this gender revolution. We can't get rid of gender. It's a battle, and it's not even necessarily a battle. Gender is a thing, and gender roles are a thing that will always play a part in our society. But yeah, it's how we react to them and how we deal with them. Thanks so much for listening. Please let us know your thoughts and carry on the discussion on social media at alpha_omega_London. Please subscribe on whichever platform you listen on and leave us a review to carry on the protest.